Predicting global warming in the 21st century, we've never really been able to predict before, but now we have this new tool, and we've talked a lot here about the evidence, some of it presented earlier today in this room, about the long 1,500-year moderate climate cycle. And I thought, why don't we just apply what we know of that cycle to what we certainly hope will be a 21st century? And of course, the consensus view is that it's all human-emitted CO2. Dangerous temperature increases, polar ice will melt, floods, droughts, and storms will be terrible, and most of the wildlife species are at risk. The solar view, the warming began maybe 1830, 1840, too early to be blamed on greenhouse emissions. Half a degree by 1940, the net warming from 1940 to 98, 0.2 of a degree, and the temperature decline since 2007 has wiped out that 0.2 essentially. We're about back where we were in 1940. 22% correlation between our thermometer record and CO2, 79% correlation, according to Dr. Soon, with sunspots. No warming at all since 98, sharp temperature drop. The Sunspot Index began predicting this in the year 2000. We assumed about a 10-year lag. It arrived a little early, maybe thanks to a La Nina. NASA let it slip in an NPR interview that the oceans had stopped cooling in the year 2003. And our new knowledge of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation makes it look as though we're going to have cooling trend, similar perhaps to 1940 to 75, from 2007 until 25 or 30 years later. After that, we will be reminded that we are still in a warming. Let's get on to all of that. Here's the latest data, of course. I don't have a pointer today. I left mine on the last trip I was on. But as you can see, temperatures going sharply down, CO2 merrily rising. The warming claims inflate as the temperatures fall. Amazing statements being made, that, including by our new president. Can't be supported. The cycle, Greenland ice cores, 1984, Willie Dansgaard, Hans Oeschger, 2 to 4 degrees at the latitude of Washington and Paris, more in the Arctic, almost none at the equator. 1,470 years plus or minus 12% during the ice ages. Ice dynamics probably make it more regular. It has not been that regular in the Holocene, but it has dominated our climate. Medieval warming, 950 to 1300. The Roman warming, 200 to 600 AD. Longer, warmer warmings before the Roman Empire, centered on 8,000 and 5,000 years ago. Let me stress that the Greens know about Dansgaard and Oeschger. They received the Environmental Nobel, the Tyler Prize, in 1996. That's when they thought the ice cores proved that CO2 ruled the climate. Then came the more refined time-scale studies. Now they don't talk about the Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles, but we will. Ratio of heavy to light oxygen isotopes in the ice cores. Ice rafted debris in the North Atlantic, Gerard Bond, 2001. Plankton microfossils in the Sargasso Sea, Keegwin in 96, and other oceans since then. Boreholes globally, ancient tree rings, cave stalagmites, oxygen isotopes again, and fossil pollen. All testify globally to the 1500-year cycle. And here's an ice core. The guy is holding it up proudly, and I do congratulate him. Undersea, we're again leaning on old oil drilling technology. And what we're drilling for are these microfossils that vary by their preference for temperature and by their abundance. And the electron microscopes and the computers again allow us to bring out the information on these long natural cycles. This is Dansgaard's picture of the Holocene from ice. I'm looking here for the stability. Golly, I guess I'm not a good enough scientist. Doesn't seem to be there. They said we could not explain the warming from 76 to 98. But then neither can we explain the cooling on the basis of CO2, the cooling from 1940 to 75, or that equally impressive surge in temperatures from 1915 to 1940. What we see is that CO2 doesn't explain much. On the other hand, we have this lovely correlation between the sunspot numbers and sea surface temperatures with roughly a 10-year lag. 79% correlation. I love to see them on separate graphs because it makes it look so much more dramatic. The theory, we're working on confirmation. When the sun is very active, it throws out a big magnetic wind, blocks most of the cosmic rays, few clouds, low wet clouds on the earth warms. When the sun is weak, the magnetic wind recedes, more cosmic rays create more cloud seeds. When they hit our atmosphere, more clouds, the earth cools. And Henrik Svensmark says this amplifies the index of solar irradiance by a factor of 4. And here are his graphs of the cosmic rays and the cloud seeding, and they move in opposition to the sunspot numbers. Nifty stuff. All right, where do we go from here? And I start with the fact that the sunspots have been predicting a sharp cooling since 2000. We still don't have a new sunspot cycle. And the longer a sunspot cycle lasts, supposedly the cooler the Earth will get. So could be pretty significant cooling. The IPCC is still predicting 2 to 4.5 degrees by 2100 with no interruptions. But really the only evidence for this is the unverified computer models. I see no reason to expect another ice age immediately. There's some question how long the Holocene has gone on. There's some question how long the warming interglacials do go on. So we really don't know about that. But we do know that until we get the next ice age or the next Dansgaard-Oeschger cooling, we are likely to see some further erratic warming. PDO, it was talked about this morning. We really discovered it in '96 because we were trying to figure why the salmon were declining in the Columbia River. Discovered an ocean-wide, long-term change in the patterns for fish all over that ocean and the tree rings around the Pacific Rim and the precipitation patterns. Roseanne Darigo of the Earth Observatory, Lamont Doherty, 10 PDOs in the last 400 years. And they explained this morning that some of the cycles are shorter than Some are like 25 years, some like 40 or 50, but 10 in the last 400 years in the Pacific. So we now have both sunspots and the Pacific cooling. NASA confirmed last spring, last April, from their Jason satellite that the cooling started roughly a year ago. Dr. Asa, the guy from Alaska, this morning put up, Akasofu, put up a better visual than I can give you. And he showed a long linear recovery from the Little Ice Age overlaid by the oscillations of the PDO. My only disagreement with that is that this is a front-loaded phenomenon. Typically get half of the warming in the first X decades of a centuries-long event. So presumably the warming we got before 1940, which cannot legitimately be attributed to CO2, was our modern warming coming on. And then a little more warming is likely to arrive erratically in the years from today until sometime, we really don't know. It may extend 3-4 centuries. The warming is unlikely, based on the past pattern, to get more than 1/2 degree beyond what we have today. We will see drought in different places. That tropical rain belt moves 500 miles north and 500 miles south. It changes rainfall patterns. We have cave paintings in the Sahara of crocodiles, giraffes, and hippopotamuses. And those people weren't reading National Geographic, they saw those animals. On the other hand, we had the Mayan culture, which disappeared during a horribly dry 9th century because the rainfall moved north. So we're going to have to watch and adapt to the drought and the rainfall patterns. The Mexican desert will come back to California. The southeastern states of the U.S. will be very dry again. And you talk about in the cave stalagmites in West Virginia, we're talking again about century-long droughts. So this is not necessarily a picnic. But it is true that history says the warmings have been the good times, and I have every confidence that when this one ends, we're going to be sad. When the Little Ice Age took over from the medieval warming, it was day and night. Massive sea floods, famines, bubonic plague moved in. Hopefully we can stave that off. But the storminess and the cloudy skies and the untimely frosts, the human population probably doubled worldwide during the medieval warming because of the favorable, stable weather. Most of Europe's castles and cathedrals, many of the temples in India, the 10,000 temples at Angkor Wat, all built during that period. I recently visited the city of Siena in Italy. Lovely 12th century marble cathedral. They were building one twice as big, and the portico is there. It's awesome in size. And in the year 1300, the climate turned and they said, forget it, we're not that grateful to God anymore. You probably remember that during the American Revolution, the British held New York, and while Washington was at Valley Forge, they were moving cannon across the harbor ice in New York. Here, tons of cannon, tons of horses, and there may have been a thermometer in the city, and it may have read 16 below zero, below Fahrenheit. When will this end? Roman warming lasted 800 years, the medieval only 350. The biggest news is that it will end. We can hope it will last another 600 years. Can't do much more than cross our fingers. And a full-scale ice age could drop temperatures 10 degrees Celsius in the temperate region. The first animal we ever drove to extinction was the cave bear in Yugoslavia about 10,000 years ago because we wanted the caves. Men in small groups with nothing but stone-tipped spears expired colonies of 25 to 40 grizzly-sized bears. They cared, but they needed those caves. Another ice age? I think so. I don't see any reason to expect we can avoid it. Those two little blips at the beginning of Dansgaard's chart before the big Holocene warming may have been a comet. May have been a comet strike, which might mean that the Holocene actually dates back almost 13,000 years now. It could mean that. And it might mean that we don't have much more left on our global warming. When the next ice age comes, all of the creatures will congregate near the equator. That's when our technology will really be tested. That's when we'll really need biotech crop plants. That's when insulation will come to be seen as the greatest invention of the 20th century. How many species are we going to lose to the warming? Probably none. Probably none. If we aren't going to lose the polar bears, virtually all of the other species have been through hundreds of these warmings before. Almost all of them abrupt. But heat doesn't kill plants. Cold kills them. If the planet's warming, you don't get rapid displacement of the vegetation. The dependent species have time to adapt. And so far, we can't point to a single species that's been lost. They claimed we had extincted the golden toad of Costa Rica with higher sea temperatures, but then somebody noticed that ranchers had cleared the forest at the bottom of the mountain where the cloud forest that harbored the golden toad changed its dynamics after the clearing. Wasn't warming, it was deforestation. What we're finding today is not lost species, it's amplified biodiversity in virtually all of the wildlands. I've looked at dozens and dozens of biologist studies, and what we find is the species moving poleward as it warms without relinquishing the place they were already inhabiting. More species per acre. Why is that a tragedy? Why are we wailing about what's happening? We caught an Antarctic fish, and we gradually warmed the water it was in, and it said thank you and swam around faster. Yes, the polar bear. We uncovered recently the jawbone of a polar bear on the island of Svalbard in the Arctic. It was in sediments that date back more than 110,000 years. That means the polar bears survived the Roman warming, the medieval warming, the Holocene warmings, and the Eemian warming was warmer than anything since. We don't know how they survived, but then we haven't really looked, have we? What we've done instead is say, oh my God, there's going to be climate change, we got to find an excuse to stop the climate change. I talked about the drought already. My southern farmers are going to have to start planting sorghum maybe instead of corn. San Diego can distill seawater if there's energy. New endorsement of this whole thing by Nur Shaviv, who's on the program here. He said, okay, if the ocean is the most important metric, let's look for Svensmark's cosmic rays in the oceans. He looked at sea temperatures, sea level changes, and net downward heat flux, and says solar irradiance is amplified on this planet 5 to 7-fold. Very important paper, very. Dr. Akasofu and his colleagues with the Japan Society of Energy and Resources, new report, voted 3-2, the Earth's warming is not due to CO2. The first break in the facade. It seems that global warming and the halting of the temperature rise are related to solar activity. Global warming projections and unprovable hypothesis. Very little sea level rise. I think, did I make it? Okay. The book is Unstoppable Global Warming Every 1,500 Years.